Tonight we drift back into a forgotten corner of London, a place lost in fog, lamplight, and long silences. You're walking down a cobbled street, the kind slick with drizzle, where your footsteps echo louder than expected. A horse-drawn cart rattles by with an eerie creak. There's no one around except a cat with one torn ear watching you like it knows your secrets. You're not alone, though. You're wide awake, and so are hundreds of others, men and women curled in beds that refuse to welcome sleep, staring at ceiling cracks that look like rivers. You've got bags under your eyes and too many thoughts in your head. The clock has struck midnight and you still haven't drifted off. It's 1923. There's no melatonin, no white noise machine, and no sympathetic podcast host to talk you down from your spiral. Just you, your twitchy nerves, and the faint hum of the city's insomnia. And the thing is, you're not weird. You're not rare. You're part of a quietly growing population of tired souls across London who just don't sleep like they used to. Your neighbor says it's the damp. Your aunt blames weak character. You just want to stop feeling like your pillow is made of judgment. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is where you are. I'd love to know who else is up with us right now. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge deeper into the night, the air soaked in that familiar mix of coal smoke and unresolved thoughts. Across the city, lights burn in windows far past bedtime. Inside, people read newspapers they don't absorb, sip brandy that doesn't help, and lie flat in bed rehearsing imaginary arguments with people from 10 years ago. There's no TikTok to scroll, no dopamine hit from a red notification, just insomnia, raw and analog. This isn't about one restless night. London, in the early 1920s, is being quietly overtaken by chronic sleeplessness. And no one quite knows what to call it. Nervous exhaustion is popular. Female hysteria, if you've got ovaries. Shell shock, if you're a man who saw too much. But nobody dares say the obvious. Something deeper is happening. A societal tide is turning, one tired mind at a time. You pass by an open window and catch the low murmur of someone reciting poetry to themselves out loud, in the dark. Tennyson, maybe. You blink and keep walking. That's not unusual. The sleepless do strange things to fill the time. You might rearrange your entire cutlery drawer at 2 a.m. or develop a deep, unshakable theory that your dog is plotting against you. And yet, amid the private chaos, the city moves on. Streets get swept. Milk bottles clink onto doorsteps. Nobody thinks insomnia is an epidemic. It doesn't spread like flu or kill like typhoid. It just whispers. Historians still argue whether the 1920s insomnia wave was a true medical crisis or simply the first time people had the leisure and electricity to notice they were awake. But there's something else. The industrial hum of the era has changed the rhythm of the night. Streetlights buzz now. Trains run later. The war may be over, but the residue of tension remains. And people, especially city people, are starting to unravel in silence. You reach a corner and find a bench under a flickering lamp. Sitting there, you notice an old man scribbling furiously in a notebook. He doesn't look up. A passing bobby nods at you, tired too. You nod back. There's a quiet understanding in this hour. Those who can't sleep form their own little tribe. You're alone, but never the only one. At home, your bedroom is a sad little theater of failed routines. You've tried counting sheep. You've tried warm milk. You even tried hanging your feet off the bed like a Victorian ghost because your cousin swore it helped. Spoiler, it didn't. You lie there listening to the neighbor's plumbing gurgle like a demon with stomach cramps. Still, no sleep. It's easy to romanticize this version of insomnia. Candlelit journaling, dreamy thoughts under wool blankets, deep late-night philosophy. But you know better. It's not poetic. It's itchy. It's annoying. It's the dull ache behind your eyes the next day when your boss asks if you're all right, old chap, and you just nod instead of growling. And yet, you begin to notice something strange. Quiet changes in certain corners of the city. Whispered rumors of places you can go. Not asylums. Not hospitals. Not opium dens, either. Places where they don't try to fix you overnight, but they will sit beside you while you stare at the ceiling. Places that seem to understand that sleep is complicated, moody, and deeply, infuriatingly human. You might hear about them in a cafe, over cold tea. Or from a cousin who works at St. Thomas's and mentions a new wing opening soon. These places don't advertise. They don't have signs. But they're real. The earliest insomnia clinics, tucked away like a city's secret exile. This is where the revolution begins. Not with fanfare or headlines, but with bedside chairs, soft lamps, and the simple audacity to say, maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're just tired. You shuffle your feet against the cold floor, the carpet worn thin in patches from other sleepless souls who've paced this same path before you. It's morning, technically, but London doesn't care. The sky still sulks behind thick cloud cover, and the street outside continues its silent judgment. You've slept, maybe, a single hour. Maybe not at all. And oddly, you're starting to realize you're not the only one. It's becoming hard to ignore. The way people linger at tea shops longer, yawning mid-sentence. The odd little columns in the back pages of newspapers asking, "Do you lie awake at night?" even though they're really just selling nerve tonics. You overhear snippets on the tram, complaints from overworked clerks and exasperated mothers. 3 nights in a row now, someone mutters. I'd sell my soul for a wink of sleep. You used to think this was just your problem. But you're beginning to see it's bigger than that. Like mold on the edges of the city, insomnia is creeping into conversations, into medicine cabinets, into public life. And yet no one's organizing rallies about it. There are no marches, no angry editorials. That's the strange thing about sleeplessness, it doesn't yell. It simply wears you down until you forget what rested ever felt like. Historians still argue whether this was truly a health crisis or merely the byproduct of modernity settling into people's bones. The 1920s saw electricity lighting up the dark, trains rumbling through neighborhoods at all hours, and radios crackling with late-night broadcasts. For the first time, the human body wasn't ruled entirely by sun and moon. You could, if you wished, stay up all night, and plenty of people did. Whether by choice or by curse, that line between waking and dreaming got smudged. And so, London quietly turned insomniac. You reach for your tea, now cold and bitter. It does nothing. Everyone says tea helps, but you've begun to suspect they just like having something to hold. Across the room, a fellow commuter stares out the window with a look that says, "If I sleep now, I'll be late." Again. His tie is crooked. His eyes are pink-rimmed. He doesn't need to tell you he was up all night, you just know. In doctors' offices, patients start describing racing thoughts and nights that don't end. But there's no real diagnosis yet. No neat little label. You're given tonics or scoldings, depending on your physician's mood. Some say it's neurasthenia, an umbrella term for the various things that go wrong when your nerves have simply had enough. Others say it's spiritual decay. Try prayer, one clergyman advises. You try it. God, like sleep, is frustratingly silent. A peculiar pattern starts to emerge. Women are told it's nerves. Men are told it's stress. Children are told to be quiet and go to bed. But no one's really listening, not yet. Your landlady downstairs swears by camphor and peppermint. She dabs it on your pillow and tells you stories of how Queen Victoria had nights like this too. You pretend it helps. It doesn't. Meanwhile, advertisements start popping up in odd places. The back of matchbooks. The insides of streetcar shelters. A drawing of a tired man clutching his head. Do you dread the night hours? You smirk. Yes. Yes, you do. But even you can tell these are just gimmicks, hustles meant to part you from your last shilling. What you need isn't a miracle cure. You need someone to acknowledge that this isn't all in your head. Or worse, your soul. At the same time, whispers of overworked doctors, especially general practitioners in the city's East End, suggest something deeper is going on. They're overwhelmed not with fever or injury, but fatigue. Relentless fatigue. Whole households struggling to sleep, generation after generation. Some researchers privately call it urban restlessness. You like that term. It feels oddly poetic, like a diagnosis with rhythm. One exhausted GP even notes in his diary, "So many of my patients complain of sleeplessness, I might as well start a midnight clinic." He's joking. Sort of. But someone else takes it seriously. You begin hearing about small rooms at larger hospitals, unofficial wards where people who can't sleep are observed overnight. No one knows quite what to do with them, but at least they're being noticed. These aren't full-fledged clinics yet, just makeshift spaces, barely staffed, and lit by 2 bright lamps. Still, the idea is there. A place for the sleepless, outside of padded rooms or prescription bottles. And the strange part? These wards aren't just full of war veterans or hysterical housewives, as the tabloids suggest. They're full of ordinary people. Shopkeepers, teachers, gardeners, even a banker or two. People who haven't slept properly in weeks but still show up to life, caffeine-fueled and mentally unraveling. One of the earliest unofficial studies from a hospital in Marylebone quietly records the notes of a young nurse who sits beside patients as they toss and mutter. She describes them as like lanterns half-lit. You love that phrase. It sticks in your mind. Lanterns half-lit. You pass by an apothecary one evening and notice the window display has changed. Rows of herbal tinctures now sit beside tiny pamphlets titled The Restless Mind, Finding Peace Through Routine. A far cry from the sleepy opium blends of decades past. The world, it seems, is tiptoeing toward a more empathetic view of your condition. Still, not everyone agrees. Some newspapers print cheeky letters to the editor complaining about the modern complaint of invented insomnia. One pompous fellow writes, "Back in my day, we didn't have time to be tired." You imagine punching him gently in the face, with a pillow, of course. But something is shifting. Slowly, sleep is being taken seriously, not as weakness, but as essential. A human right, not a luxury. And in that shift, the foundations for a revolution are quietly being laid. The fog rolls in again as you make your way home, your breath visible in the gaslight. You pass by that same bench from before. The old man is gone, but a crumpled page of his notebook flutters at your feet. You stoop to pick it up. It reads, in shaky cursive, "It is not death I fear, but the long hours before it, unvisited by sleep." Yeah, you get that. Your fingers hover over a small tin box labeled Dr. Faulkner's Dream Dust, its gold-embossed letters promising a most tranquil slumber without offense to the nerves or bowels. It smells vaguely of burnt herbs and questionable hope. You bought it last week from a man who set up a stall near Charing Cross, right between a newspaper stand and a woman selling boot polish. He had the kind of mustache that made you trust him briefly. You don't anymore. Tonight, like too many nights before, you find yourself rummaging through drawers filled with other strange remedies. One vial holds powdered lettuce seed, apparently favored by Roman emperors for easing restless humors. Another bottle contains a murky greenish oil with a handwritten label, "Apply to temples. Avoid eye contact. Or open flames." Encouraging. It's the 1920s, and London is a jungle of potions, pills, and nighttime promises. You're not the only one with a personal apothecary rattling in their cupboard. Across the city, people chase sleep the way others chase fame or love. And what they chase it with. Honestly, it's a toss-up between absurd, mildly dangerous, and somehow charming. There's warm milk, of course, always warm milk. You've drunk enough to develop a Pavlovian yawn at the sight of a kettle. Then there are valerian drops, which smell like a wet dog but are whispered about in hushed tones among exhausted grandmothers. Some swear by chamomile tea, others by hot gin with nutmeg, and one curious trend involves laying cabbage leaves on your forehead. You tried it once. You felt like a sandwich. One woman in Kensington claims she sleeps perfectly by tapping her toes exactly 60 times before bed while reciting lines from A Midsummer Night's Dream. Historians still argue whether her case was genuine insomnia or just early-stage theatre kid. But not all remedies are quaint or harmless. This is also an era drenched in opiates and early barbiturates, with powders sold over the counter that could knock out a horse. Morphine still lingers in bathroom cabinets from wartime, prescribed freely for everything from headaches to heartbreaks. And it works, sure, but it doesn't offer rest. It offers absence. You know people who've taken it too far. The man in your boarding house who once showed up to breakfast wearing only socks and muttering about sea serpents. Or the widow down the street who sleeps for 15 hours at a time, waking only to weep and wander. You start to understand the real danger isn't staying awake, it's what you'll take just to not be awake anymore. In the absence of reliable medical guidance, a kind of folk science emerges. Londoners create rituals, routines, little nighttime cults. You hear of a pub in Hackney that plays only sea shanties after 10 p.m. because the owner swears rhythmic music lulls his patrons into a spiritual stupor. One particularly posh sleep manual claims eating 3 raw carrots while lying on your left side resets your body clock. Another recommends bathing in moon-charged water, which, according to the footnotes, is just regular water you leave on your windowsill. A favorite among your sleepless circle is the midnight stroll. The idea is to walk until exhaustion conquers you. It sounds romantic, but usually it ends with someone getting lost near the canal, chatting with ducks. One night, you did 8 laps around your block and returned home even more alert, having composed a 32-line poem about chimney sweeps that no one asked for. Even doctors, the few who bother to care about sleep, are inconsistent. Some say insomnia is purely physical, an overtaxed heart, an inflamed liver, bad digestion. Others believe it stems from mental overstimulation, the brain refusing to dim. A small but vocal minority, mostly older gentlemen in stiff collars, still think it's moral. As in, if you can't sleep, you're probably guilty of something. Enter Dr. Edwin Hale, a somewhat obscure but passionate physician who insists on examining each of his sleepless patients for over an hour, just talking. Not poking or prescribing, just asking, "What's on your mind?" It's radical. It's also considered slightly embarrassing by his peers. They mockingly nickname him the Whispering Quack. But you hear stories. Patients who see Dr. Hale report sleeping through the night after one long conversation. Not because he fixed them, but because someone finally listened. He suggests breathing exercises, consistent bedtime routines, and reducing evening agitation. He calls sleep a dialogue between the body and the world. You like that? It feels less like a medical failure and more like a missed appointment with the moon. And yet, desperation leads many to ignore people like Dr. Hale in favor of quicker fixes. Patent medicines, mass-produced sleep cures, are booming. Somnial, Noctin, Dreamies. Their ads promise a night of bliss. Their ingredients are vague at best. Some contain chloral hydrate, a compound so potent it was once nicknamed knockout drops. Others boast about herbal blends that turn out to be 80% sugar and 20% wishful thinking. The most infamous of these was a now-banned concoction called Night Peace, sold in dark blue bottles with gold lettering. It was all the rage until someone discovered it contained trace amounts of arsenic. Whoops! Despite this, pharmacies can't keep the shelves stocked. Every tired person thinks, maybe this one will work. And maybe, for a night or two, it does. But then the cycle returns. Awake at 2:12 a.m., staring at the ceiling and wondering if the dream of sleep is just that, a dream. What you begin to understand is that insomnia is both universal and deeply personal. Your cousin needs silence, you need sound. Your neighbor needs ritual, you need novelty. There's no one cure, no one answer, just attempts. And under every attempt is the same aching hope. Please, let tonight be the night. And so, you mix your own remedy. 1 part routine, 1 part curiosity, 1 part surrender. You light a candle with a wooden match. You fluff the pillows with theatrical flair. You promise not to check the clock. You sip your new tea, lavender and something else. You can't pronounce it, but it smells gentle. You nestle down and breathe. And across the city, others do the same. 1,000 tiny rituals flicker like stars, each one hoping to coax sleep out of hiding. Some will succeed, some won't. But tonight, you try again. You wake up to sunlight slanting through the curtains, not because you slept, but because you finally gave up around 5 a.m. and passed out fully clothed. The teacup is still on the bedside table, half full and bitter cold. The candle burned out somewhere between page 47 of your book and your third mental recitation of the alphabet backwards. You're not sure if it was the herbs, the exhaustion, or sheer boredom that finally knocked you out. But here you are. Across town, the same thing is happening in hundreds of flats and boarding houses. Sleeplessness isn't just a problem anymore, it's a trend. And where there's a trend, someone will always try to brand it. It starts with whispers in the right drawing rooms, society women hosting evening wakefulness salons where insomnia is spoken about in the same breath as modern art and French novels. One hostess reportedly lit the room entirely with lavender candles and served only white foods, steamed fish, peeled grapes, milk pudding. She called it the color of rest. You try not to roll your eyes too hard. Still, something is brewing beneath the pretension. Because at the heart of it, even the fashionable crowd is tired. Their staff is tired. The milkman is tired. London is tired. And into that fatigue steps something new, structure. Hospitals begin noticing patterns in the kinds of people showing up at odd hours with exhaustion, anxiety, and ambiguous complaints. They're not sick in the traditional sense, no fevers, no wounds. But they're afraid, unspooled. And a few forward-thinking administrators begin setting aside actual time slots for rest consultations. It sounds silly, but for the time, it's revolutionary. You walk past a notice tacked to the side of the Royal London Homeopathic Hospital. Evening rest observations available. Inquire at main desk. A small step, yes. But it marks a shift. For the first time, rest is being institutionalized, not as weakness, but as legitimate need. And in South London, something even more radical stirs. You've heard of Dr. Lillian Knight, barely, through rumors passed around public libraries and whispered across cafe tables. A physician with a stubborn streak and a deeply unfashionable belief that sleeplessness is not a symptom, it's a condition. And that it can be treated gently. She begins seeing patients out of her own home in Brixton. Not for surgery, not for bleeding, not even for typical house calls. Just for sleep. Her sessions run in the late evenings. She calls them rest interviews. Patients sit in dim rooms with soft ticking clocks and are asked simple things like, "When did your nights change?" or "What are you afraid of in the dark?" It sounds absurd. But people flock to her. Historians still argue whether Dr. Knight can truly be called the first sleep clinician. Some say her methods were more spiritual than medical. Others claim she just repackaged old wives' wisdom and sprinkled it with lavender oil. But one thing's certain, she made people feel heard. And for the sleepless, that was a rare and precious thing. Dr. Knight's clinic, if you can call it that, is no more than a converted sitting room with a chaise longue and too many books. But the moment you step inside, something shifts. The light is lower. The air smells faintly of sandalwood and cedar. You're offered warm water, not tea. She says tea hides the symptoms, and you're invited to sit. You tell her the story. The whole thing. How your nights got longer and your patients got shorter. How you dread your bed because it's not a place of peace but of pressure. She nods. She listens. She writes almost nothing down. But somehow, you feel studied. Carefully, kindly studied. She doesn't give you a pill. She gives you a logbook. Just write, she says. Before and after you try to sleep. Even if it's nonsense. You scoff. But you do it. And slowly, glacially, you start to see the patterns. You sleep better on Tuesdays, for some reason. Worse after family visits. You tend to feel most alert around 11 p.m., regardless of what you've done that day. You start thinking of your insomnia not as a monster, but as a map. And Dr. Knight. She's teaching you how to read it. You're not alone in this. More clinics like hers begin to emerge, unofficial and underfunded, but hopeful. A doctor in Soho turns his second office into a sleep sanctuary, open from 7 p.m. to midnight. A nurse in Camden starts recording bedtime routines from her patients and collating the data into bizarre little charts with titles like the egg and toast correlation to dream frequency. It's not science, not yet, but it's the beginning of one. One of the more colorful figures to enter the scene is Basil Carrington, an eccentric former stage hypnotist who insists he can put anyone to sleep with just his voice. He opens what he calls a restorium near the West End, where he performs guided wind downs to small audiences on rented chaise longues. Most of his clients sleep through the performance, or pretend to, for the sake of their shillings. You attend once. It's ridiculous. And oddly soothing. Basil's voice is somewhere between velvet and warm honey, and the room smells like expensive bookstores. You don't fall asleep. But you don't feel angry about that for once. And that's something. Meanwhile, the medical establishment remains skeptical. The British Medical Journal runs a scathing editorial titled The Modern Myth of Sleep Clinics, calling them idle sanctuaries for the neurotically inclined. You read it twice. Then 3 times. It's oddly defensive, and it smells a lot like fear. Because for all the mocking, these spaces are working. Quietly. Imperfectly. But they're doing something medicine forgot how to do. They're respecting the night. You leave Dr. Knight's with a soft cloth bundle tied with string. Inside is a small sachet of crushed hops and lemon balm. Not a cure. Not even a prescription. Just a gesture. A reminder that sometimes comfort is part of the treatment. You fall asleep that night at 2:43 a.m., a new record. It's not magic. It's not even enough. But it's something. And in the soft dark of Brixton, a revolution is stretching its legs. You start noticing the signs everywhere now, small brass plaques on door frames that read rest clinic or evening consultations by appointment. They're discreet, almost bashful in tone, as if they're still a little embarrassed to exist. But they do exist. And more importantly, people are going. You overhear two women discussing the latest one in Clerkenwell over tea and sardine sandwiches, like it's the new rage, right between bobbed hair and electric toasters. He's very calming, one says of the doctor there. Doesn't look at you like you're being dramatic. Offers you an oat biscuit and everything. You feel an odd mix of curiosity and envy. You haven't been offered an oat biscuit in months. Meanwhile, newspapers catch wind of the trend. Not front page coverage, of course, this isn't politics or scandal, but tucked between stories about the latest motorcar accident and the discovery of a three-legged chicken in Norfolk. They call it the drowsy doctor movement, and the headlines lean sarcastic. London's night owls seek professional cuddles, declares one. Another proclaims, cure for sleeplessness. Try listening to a man talk slowly. Classic British snark, brewed strong. But tucked between the winks and wisecracks are interviews with real people, exhausted, grateful, less desperate than before. Their words are quiet, but firm. I don't dread bedtime anymore. I feel human again. You clip those out and press them between the pages of your logbook. Not because you're sentimental, okay, maybe a bit, but because it's proof. This thing, this strange sleepy tide, is rising. Behind the scenes, the medical world can't ignore it forever. Forward-thinking physicians begin visiting these clinics under the guise of observation, though you can tell they're secretly hoping to understand it, maybe even feel it. Some leave unimpressed. But others stay longer, ask more questions, scribble frantic notes in the corner during sessions. You see one of them pacing outside Dr. Knight's house one evening, adjusting his spectacles like he's about to do something reckless. Like, listen. That's when the term insomnia starts getting discussed in earnest, not as a character flaw or vague complaint, but as a clinical phenomenon. A real diagnosis. A real problem. Historians still argue whether the sudden medical shift was driven by genuine concern or opportunistic interest. After all, where there's demand, there's money. But regardless of motive, the tide has turned. Sleep is now a subject worthy of study. Not just a thing people do, but a thing people suffer from, heal toward, even imagine this, deserve. The most radical idea of all? That rest isn't laziness. It's maintenance. It seems small, but it lands like a thunderclap in certain circles. You hear it repeated in workshops and whispered by nurses. Rest isn't luxury. It's survival. And suddenly, the clinics take on a new edge. Not just sleepy sanctuaries, but acts of quiet rebellion. And rebellion needs a headquarters. In early 1926, the London Rest and Recovery Cooperative is quietly founded by a group of sleep clinicians, reform-minded physicians, and one very pushy nurse named Florence Adams, who everyone agrees could probably get Parliament to take a nap if she shouted loudly enough. The cooperative isn't flashy. No fancy building or uniforms. Just a growing network of people who believe in soft lighting, warm water, and listening without judgment. You attend one of their early gatherings in a borrowed church basement. It smells like old hymnals and shoe polish. Folding chairs creak under tired bodies. But the conversation flows low, serious, and strangely hopeful. They share strategies, swap notes, talk about patterns in sleeplessness. A man stands up and describes what he calls the grey hour, that moment just before dawn when even hope feels exhausted. Heads nod around the room. Florence keeps everyone on track, barking reminders like, "No chloroform solutions, this is not the 1890s, and we don't call it hysteria anymore, Arthur." It's oddly comforting. The cooperative prints a small pamphlet, a framework for ethical rest, guidelines for evening clinics. It outlines things like room temperature, lighting, the importance of predictable schedules, and yes, oat biscuits. You read it cover to cover like it's a sacred text. You're not alone. You see small but meaningful changes ripple through the city. Some clinics introduce ambient companions, not doctors, not nurses, just calm people paid to sit near patients and speak softly if needed. You apply. You're accepted. On your first night, a woman named Elsie sits beside you, tears leaking silently down her cheeks. You don't ask why. You just tell her the moon is full and the air smells like toasted chestnuts. She falls asleep mid-sentence. You've never felt more useful. Some clinics try more theatrical methods. The Soho branch hangs navy blue curtains to simulate nighttime even during the day. One particularly avant-garde location in Marylebone starts hosting Silent Hour, a full 60 minutes with no speaking, no movement, no eye contact. Just presence. A man falls asleep on the floor. No one moves him. It's a success. Meanwhile, fringe ideas bubble up from the shadows. A self-styled dream scholar named Thaddeus Pym claims he can teach people to sleep by synchronizing their brainwaves using a series of tone chimes and a rotating chair. He lasts 3 sessions before someone vomits and is kindly asked to retire his chimes. You admire the commitment, though. Amid the seriousness, there are moments of pure comedy. A sleep clinic in Paddington mistakenly pipes jazz into their rest chamber instead of lullabies. Instead of relaxing, everyone leaves tapping their feet and wide awake. Someone jokes, "At least we're tired of being awake." It becomes a slogan. Through all of this, something beautiful is happening. Insomnia, that lonely spectre of the night, is becoming communal. Not cured, perhaps, but cradled. Understood. Spoken of without shame. And you're sleeping a little better. Not every night, but enough. And when you don't, you no longer panic. You reach for your logbook. You make tea without resentment. You ride the tide of wakefulness with a gentler grip. Because now, you know it's not your fault. You know the city is full of others riding their own sleepless waves. London hums at night with the sound of quiet revolutions. Yours is among them. You're dozing off one evening, finally, blissfully, when the flat upstairs decides now is the perfect time to drag furniture across their floor for 30 minutes straight. The walls, as always, are made of papier-mâché and polite delusion, so sleep slips away like steam. Again. You stare at the ceiling, counting how many creaks it takes to summon fury. Then you remember, the cooperative is testing new communal sleep rooms. You grab your coat. They call them rest commons, shared spaces with low beds, hushed tones, and no ticking clocks allowed. You show up at one tucked between a disused bookbinder's and a tobacconist's on a back alley in Holborn. The outside smells like soot and stubbornness. Inside, it's cool linen, beeswax, and whispers. You check in. No real names needed, just initials. The attendant, a gentle-faced man with a spectacular mustache, hands you a folded card. It reads, "Here, silence is sacred, but presence is welcome." You nod, even though your brain says it sounds like something from a cult pamphlet. Still, you appreciate the vibe. The room holds 10 beds, each curtained on 3 sides, spaced far enough apart that no one's breath brushes yours. Some people arrive with their own pillows. One woman clutches a teddy bear with the confidence of a banker. You claim a cot near the corner and settle in. You don't sleep, but you don't panic either. Instead, you listen to the gentle creak of someone adjusting under a blanket, the exhale of a stranger drifting off, the soft shuffle of slippers on cork flooring. It's not quite restful, but it's not hostile. And that's enough. For now. Outside these commons, the city is still restless. But inside, a low-grade peace holds steady. The rest commons gain popularity quickly. Not in headlines or society pages, no one throws galas for sleepy revolutionaries, but in whispers and passed-on rumors. A man in Whitechapel swears he dreamt for the first time in a year after spending a night in one. A woman in Islington brings her insomnia-prone sister every Thursday, armed with warm socks and a small jar of homemade marmalade for post-nap clarity. Some argue it's a return to Victorian convalescence wards, but minus the corsets and the tuberculosis. Historians still debate whether these commons were healthcare innovations or just temporary reprieves from London's growing grind. One critic sniffed that it was nap socialism. You suspect he just hasn't napped in a while. The real innovation, though, isn't the furniture or the herbal sachets. It's shared experience. For centuries, sleeplessness was something to hide. You weren't supposed to admit that you paced the floorboards at night or stared at the ceiling counting regrets. But here, in these soft-lit corners of London, it's spoken aloud. "I haven't slept properly since the war," one man confesses. "I keep dreaming my job is watching me sleep," another woman says, to laughter that's far too knowing. They create something like group therapy, but stripped of jargon and chairs in a circle. It's just people lying near each other, breathing slowly, understanding something wordless. You lie beside strangers and feel less strange. At one rest commons in Kensington, someone begins reading softly from novels, nothing heavy. Mostly nature writing and old travelogues. You catch a fragment as you pass one evening. The camels moved like ghosts across the sand, slow and certain. It stays with you. You don't even like camels. Soon, more clinics adopt their own flavor. The one in Shoreditch uses guided breathing exercises. The Hackney Clinic insists on warm milk and no newspapers allowed within 50 feet. A new one in Hampstead has dimming lamps that slowly lower the light over 45 minutes, like a theatrical sunset. Of course, not all experiments succeed. One ambitious clinic in Bethnal Green installs a soundscape machine, a mechanical monstrosity meant to simulate a woodland stream. It malfunctions and plays horse gallops instead. 5 people leave more awake than when they arrived. One returns the next night, claiming he now sleeps best to stampeding hooves. Humans are weird. But this stage of the movement, the rise of public rest, isn't about perfect outcomes. It's about trying. Collectively. And that matters more than anyone expected. You volunteer at the rest commons once a week now. You straighten blankets, refill carafes of barley water, replace wilted lavender bundles. You learn people's preferences, who needs an extra pillow, who hums before they fall asleep, who likes the corner farthest from the door because doors carry worries. One night, you watch a man weep softly for 10 minutes before drifting off. No one speaks. No one judges. And when he leaves, He nods at you with eyes clearer than when he came in. You'll remember that nod for years. Back outside, London pretends none of this is happening. But inside the clinics, the commons, the late-night rooms filled with muted clocks and hand-drawn logs, a new language of rest is being spoken. And that language starts reaching other cities. Delegates from Manchester and Edinburgh arrive to observe the commons. One, a no-nonsense Glaswegian with a clipboard and a dislike of soft furnishings, leaves visibly moved. "We'll set one up in Govan," she mutters, dabbing at her eyes with an aggressively practical handkerchief. The movement is growing. Slowly, like moss. Soft, but stubborn. Still, not everyone's on board. A coalition of private doctors issues a pamphlet titled "Against the Infantilization of the Restless Mind." In it, they claim the clinics promote weakness and dependency. You read it while wrapped in a weighted blanket, sipping chamomile, and honestly, it just makes you drowsy. So, thanks. But for every critic, 3 new patients arrive. Word of mouth spreads faster than anyone expected. A woman starts drawing maps of sleep spaces across the city, tiny hand-sketched diagrams passed around like treasure maps. One appears on a notice board at your local grocer: "Safe rest, soft light, west of the station, ask for J." You smile. The underground sleep network lives. And in this world of whispers and warm blankets, you finally stop feeling like your sleeplessness is a personal failing. You start seeing it as part of a landscape, shared, navigable, maybe even survivable. And on some nights, you sleep without effort. That, more than anything, feels like revolution. You wake in the rest commons one morning before the others. The light is dim, the air still heavy with night, and for a few seconds you just lie there, blinking at the fabric canopy above. No pounding thoughts. No dread. Just stillness. It won't last, of course. Outside, the postman will rattle his cart. Somewhere, a kettle will scream. But for now, the silence is so complete it almost hums. And then, movement, a rustle, a cough muffled by a sleeve. Another body coming back to the world. You exchange sleepy nods. No words. You both understand what this place is. And what it isn't. Outside these walls, something curious is starting to happen. Doctors. Real ones. White coat and Latin word-wielding professionals are beginning to show up not to study or scoff, but to listen. They arrive sheepishly at first, under aliases, asking vague questions about the physiological consequences of rhythmic rocking or non-pharmaceutical intervention trends. One gets caught sketching the pillow arrangement. Another spends 20 minutes trying to understand why the clinic doesn't use timers. And then, something even stranger, they start to agree. At the Royal College of Physicians, the term behavioral rest therapy is floated during a symposium. It's not met with laughter. Not entirely, anyway. One particularly crusty old surgeon mutters, "Well, if people want to sit around cuddling blankets, I suppose it's cheaper than morphine." But others lean forward. Take notes. Ask, could rest be diagnostic? A 1927 issue of The Lancet features a short, cautious piece titled "The Potential Role of Controlled Environment in Non-Chemical Sleep Restoration." Not exactly riveting bedtime reading, but it's the first time a major medical journal doesn't treat sleeplessness as purely a symptom. It considers it a condition. A state worthy of independent inquiry. Historians still argue whether this shift was genuine acceptance or just a strategic rebranding. The language is careful, hedged. You can tell they don't want to admit the commons might have figured it out first. Meanwhile, back at the clinics, the real experiment continues. A physician named Dr. Mirabel Jameson, a tiny woman with hands like dried leaves and eyes that miss nothing, starts showing up weekly at your commons. She doesn't interfere, just observes, takes notes, occasionally offers someone a second blanket. She says little, but when she speaks, people listen. One evening, she gives a talk to the cooperative titled, "What if sleeplessness isn't a defect, but a signal?" You sit near the back, next to a man who smells faintly of varnish. He nods along like she's reading his diary. She talks about overstimulation, the industrial workweek, artificial lighting, grief, anxiety, post-war tension, and how the body doesn't forget. Maybe, she says, insomnia isn't a problem to fix, but a message to decode. People blink at her in the silence that follows. You feel something settle in your chest. Something like relief. And suddenly, the conversation changes. Clinics begin adjusting not just to treat sleeplessness, but to read it. They chart patterns, map triggers. They begin offering optional life history sessions, casual, gentle interviews with staff trained not in psychology, but in listening. You help transcribe the notes. They read like secret confessions whispered into the dark. One man can't sleep in silence, it reminds him of the trenches. A widow says she wakes at 2:17 a.m. every night because that's when her husband used to come home from work. A teenage girl says she dreams of drowning every time she eats before bed, so now she fasts from noon. These aren't pathologies. They're stories. And slowly, the clinics shift from being soft landing pads to quiet sleuthing labs. You even try it yourself. One session with a man named Theo, who has the kind of voice you'd follow into a cave, and he asks you, gently, when your sleeplessness began. You say something glib, then something sad, and then something you didn't realize you'd remembered. You leave without answers. But you sleep that night anyway. Meanwhile, the press catches up, sort of. A Sunday supplement runs a piece called London's New Sleep Whisperers, with a photo of Dr. Jameson looking surprised and underlit. The article half mocks, half marvels. But they include patient testimonies. One says, "I haven't taken sleeping powders in 6 months." Another, "I learned to breathe again. Properly." One just says, "Thank you. It's not a movement anymore. It's a phenomenon." Even the language changes. Insomniacs becomes wakefuls. Treatment becomes co-restoration. Someone tries to brand it dreamsmithing, but it doesn't stick, thank goodness. Still, not all feedback is kind. One group of psychiatrists publicly challenges the clinic's methods, accusing them of promoting pseudoscience. They demand studies, trials, double-blind this, randomized that. The cooperative responds not with data, but with tea and a long-form letter explaining how some things can't be measured without being ruined. The letter ends, "Feel free to visit us and see for yourself. Bring slippers." The critics never come, but the patients keep arriving. One night, you're asked to give a small talk at the Commons about your experience as both volunteer and occasional sufferer. You panic. You stammer. You forget to breathe. Then someone in the back says, "Just tell us a bedtime story." And so you do. You talk about your worst nights. About walking the streets of London at 3 a.m. with nowhere soft to go. About thinking your body was broken. About finding a room with 10 strangers and no clocks. About drifting off mid-sentence and waking up whole. When you finish, no one claps. They just sit quietly, breathing in unison. A few eyes glisten. Someone murmurs, "That was enough." You nod. It was. You don't know what's next. You've stopped needing to. But you know this. Something strange and soft is shifting in the bones of the city. And for the first time in years, you believe you'll sleep again. You start noticing things in the city that weren't there before, or maybe they were, and you just couldn't see them while sleep deprived. A tiny sign in the window of a bakery, quiet hour, 4 to 5 p.m. daily. Come sit. No purchases necessary. A handwritten poster at a tram stop. Can't sleep? Join us for warm broth and silence, Thursdays. A note tucked inside a library book. Page 187 made me yawn. You're not alone. It feels like the city is quietly conspiring in your favor now. The same city that once rattled and buzzed and demanded too much has grown, gentle, in patches. And it's not just sentimentality. Something real is happening. People are building micro-refuges. Unlike the official rest commons or the cooperatives clinics, these are entirely informal, homegrown havens. Rooms above barbershops. Back corners of church halls. A retired schoolteacher opens up her sunroom and fills it with lavender, quilts, and books no one has to finish. There's even a floating barge on the Thames now, rocking softly under fairy lights, inviting anyone restless to come aboard after midnight. They call it the Sleep Ark. Of course they do. You visit one of these micro-refuges on a foggy Tuesday. It's in an old tram conductor's booth that someone's refitted with beanbags, thermal curtains, and a curious contraption that puffs warm scented air into the corner. Clove and chamomile. A man in his 70s presides over it like a priest. He offers you a place to sit and says, "We don't talk here, but we do listen. If you need, you sit. You don't talk, but you feel heard anyway." Historians still debate whether these micro-refuges were spontaneous or a calculated extension of the original movement. Whether they were inspired by a social need or a secret network of tired postal workers. You rather like the idea that they were both. You've seen a surprising number of letter carriers in them. You keep volunteering, of course, but now you also help map these little sanctuaries. You and a woman named Elsie begin sketching them onto old ordnance survey maps in colored pencil. Blue for clinical, green for informal, yellow for questionably legal but definitely peaceful. One refuge is just an attic space above a luthier's shop. You have to climb a creaky stair and tap twice on the wood. Inside, there's a hammock and a logbook where visitors write half sentences like, "First time I didn't cry this week." Or, "He brought me here. We didn't speak. It was perfect." You read those entries sometimes when you can't sleep, and the words settle under your skin like warm tea. The wider city starts to notice. A few municipal buildings tentatively introduce silent waiting rooms. Train stations test midnight pause zones, where the lights are dimmed and announcements are replaced by soft bells. A local council attempts a sleep ambassador scheme, but one of the ambassadors falls asleep during a planning meeting, and the idea is quietly dropped. No one really minds. Of course, bureaucracy being what it is, there's resistance. An alderman from Southwark accuses these initiatives of being coddling to the point of collapse. He declares, "We are a city of industry, not indulgence." This, hilariously, during a session that began 20 minutes late because he couldn't find his spectacles. One public debate airs on the BBC Wireless. The panel includes a physician, a social reformer, a railway union rep, and delightfully a woman known only as Mrs. P, who runs a sleep refuge from her greenhouse. She steals the show. At one point, the host asks her if all this fuss over sleeping spaces isn't a bit much. She replies, "I never said people must sleep. I said they must have somewhere kind to not sleep in." The line goes viral, well, as viral as anything could in 1928. You hear it repeated at cafes, in queues, scribbled on notes. Meanwhile, you witness something new in the clinics: recovery. Not dramatic, not instant, but real. A man who used to jerk awake every hour now sleeps 6 straight. A young girl who once trembled at dusk begins to nap on purpose. A woman in her 40s, after a year of silence, begins humming as she makes tea in the shared kitchen. The air shifts. The quiet holds them. You're tempted to ask, is this working? And what does working mean anyway? Some say yes, patients are reporting fewer panic episodes, more coherent days, even dreams. Others argue that it's just a phase. A collective placebo. A moment of calm before the next urban storm. Historians still can't agree. But here's what you know: your life is different. And not in some grand, cinematic way. It's the little things. You no longer dread nightfall. You no longer dread yourself. One evening, you step into a micro-refuge nestled in an old carriage house near Bloomsbury. You sit by the fire, legs tucked beneath a faded tartan. Across from you is a man reading a book upside down. You point it out. He chuckles and says, "I haven't slept in 2 days." You don't pity him. He doesn't ask for it. You just say, "Maybe tonight." He nods. Maybe. Back outside, the city continues as it always has: fast, loud, uneven. But you've carved out a map of softness, and it's real. Later that week, you post a small sign on your building's front door: second floor landing. 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. Cushions welcome. You're not even sure anyone will come. But someone does. You wake to a soft knock on the door, barely there, like someone asking permission from the air itself. When you open it, a young man stands there awkwardly, clutching a cushion and a thermos. He says nothing, just looks past you toward the stairwell. You nod and step aside. This is how it begins. Your landing, just a threadbare rug, 2 battered chairs, and one window with a view of brick and sky, becomes a pause point. A place between chaos and calm. It doesn't take much. One quiet space, open eyes, and no demands. Within a week, 4 people use it. By the end of the month, it's 8. And you keep the window slightly cracked and light a single candle in a jar. Nothing too cozy. Just enough to say, you're not alone. That's the real miracle of these years, not the clinics, not the headlines, not even the academic interest. It's the way ordinary people start building little lighthouses from their own fatigue. You hear about a cabbie who keeps lavender pouches in his backseat and offers resting rides to insomniacs who just need to coast quietly through the city at 2 a.m. You meet a midwife who sets up a midnight porch, open to anyone with racing thoughts. She never asks for stories, she just rocks gently and hums. Word spreads in slow pulses, like ripples through heavy water. You begin to hear the phrase sleep commons used not just for the original clinics but for any space that dares to welcome the sleepless without trying to fix them. It's less a program now and more a code. A kind of sleepy semaphore passed from one weary soul to another. But not all reactions are kind. The tabloids catch wind and twist it, as they do. One article reads, "Is London's sleep movement just code for layabouts?" Another insists rest clinics may be harboring radicals, as if too much quiet turns you into a revolutionary. Honestly, it might. There's even an accusation that one commons is a front for a cult. The headline, "Do they dream together?" Which sounds more romantic than scandalous, if you're honest. The cooperative responds by doing exactly nothing. No denials. No press releases. Just more tea, more cushions, and a notice board that now includes a clipping of the "Do They Dream Together" headline, annotated with, "Only after lights out." You start attending the cooperative's inner meetings, not out of ambition, but because they ask, and because you've been around long enough to speak the language of hush and softness with fluency. The meetings aren't what you expect. No strategy charts. No hierarchy. Just low chairs in a circle, strong tea, and pages of listener feedback. They read every comment out loud. Slowly. Gently. As if reading a liturgy. One night, someone reads a line that stays with you. "I didn't fall asleep, but I remembered how to close my eyes without fear." And just like that, the room is silent for a full minute. A rare thing, even for this crowd. Historians still debate the leadership structure of the cooperative. Some claim there was a shadow council, orchestrating policy from behind curtain folds. Others insist it was an entirely flat collective. You know the truth is somewhere in between, guided not by authority, but by intuition and mutual fatigue. Meanwhile, formal medicine tries to keep up. The British Medical Association releases a position paper titled Environmental and Behavioral Approaches to Sleep Disorders. It's full of disclaimers and qualifiers, but the underlying message is clear: they're paying attention now. At King's College, a sleep research department is established. Its first hire, Dr. Mirabel Jameson. You see her once, years later, at a Commons fundraiser. She's older now, but still has that sharp glint. When you thank her, she shakes her head and says, "All I did was listen." You begin to sense a subtle transformation in the language used around sleep. No more disorders. More talk of patterns, responses, states of rest. Not everyone buys in. The pharmaceutical companies certainly don't. Sales of bromides dip. A chemist in Camden hangs a sarcastic sign, "Try not sleeping through the night. Just rub this on your anxiety." Still, people shift. You spot strangers carrying travel-sized pillows. You hear the phrase "second rest" catch on, meaning that deep, unguided lull between midnight and dawn. A young man you meet at a Commons session describes it best: "It's not sleep, exactly. More like floating close to myself." There are critics, of course. One prominent neurologist writes a scathing editorial claiming that sleep cannot be culturally constructed and that dreams are not public property. You suspect this man has not had a decent nap in 20 years. The cooperative responds by hosting an open house titled "You're Invited to Our Dream Club. It's Not What You Think." You attend. They serve rice pudding and wear paper hats. You fall into a rhythm. Days filled with whatever work you can manage. Nights as anchor points for others who wander in half-broken but open-hearted. Some sleep. Some don't. Some cry. Some ask if they can just sit by the window. You say yes. You always say yes. And then, one night, something strange happens. You sleep through the night. All the way through. You wake and feel no fanfare. Just rested. Like you went somewhere soft and kind and came back whole. You don't tell anyone. You don't want to spook it. But you carry the knowledge like a secret lantern inside your chest. And you begin to notice, others are sleeping too. Not always. Not predictably. But here and there, people are healing. Slowly. Softly. Like moss growing back on a scorched tree. You don't claim credit. No one does. That's not how this movement works. There are no plaques. No Nobel Prizes. Just warmth passed hand to hand in the night. The kind of revolution you never quite notice until you realize you've stopped bleeding. The quiet kind. You're sitting on the floor of the landing one night, back against the wall, blanket over your lap, sipping tea that tastes like chamomile and dust when you hear the soft pad of bare feet on the stairs. It's a little girl, maybe 8, maybe 10, wrapped in her father's coat, sleeves flopping past her hands. She peers around the corner, wide-eyed and curious, not scared. You smile. She nods once, solemn as a bishop, and settles beside you without a word. You both just sit. A few minutes later, her mum appears, out of breath and flustered, clearly expecting disaster. But when she sees her daughter curled up next to you, already drifting, something in her posture softens. She mouths, "Thank you," and you just shake your head. Because that's the whole point. No saviors here. Just space. This scene repeats itself, in one form or another, for the next few months. Children. Turns out, the sleepless aren't limited to factory workers, shell-shocked veterans, or weary mothers. Kids have been keeping their own midnight vigils, silently, often unseen. The difference is, now they have somewhere to go. You notice more parents tiptoeing into clinics with children in tow. Not because they expect miracle cures, but because they sense, maybe instinctively, that their kids need gentler nights. That lullabies aren't enough. That fear doesn't always wait until adulthood. Historians still argue whether this was when the movement officially shifted into the domestic sphere. Some trace the origins back to a single pamphlet distributed in Hackney titled "So Your Child Can't Sleep, It's Not Your Fault." Others point to a group of nannies who began organizing twilight storytelling circles in Hyde Park, complete with flannel blankets and thermoses of warm milk. You find both ideas entirely plausible. At your own landing sessions, children begin to arrive more frequently. Always with a parent at first. Then, sometimes, without. A sleepy wave from a window across the street. A knock. A nod. A presence. You keep a small box of quiet toys now, jigsaw pieces, soft dice, buttons shaped like moons. One boy, around 6, insists on bringing a tiny wooden soldier every time and making him stand guard. You make a point of saluting the soldier each night. He never blinks. The cooperative takes notice. They form a sub-circle, the Gentle Watch, focused on family sleep practices. Not rigid schedules or stern rules. Just shared restfulness. They begin hosting drift nights where families can gather, listen to soft music, maybe nap in companionable silence. No expectations. Just space to be. You attend one. A toddler spills juice on your lap, a teenager snores audibly 3 feet from a retired opera singer, and a dog named Muffin somehow ends up under your chair. It's chaotic. And perfect. Like bedtime in a kind house. Meanwhile, a new scholarly term surfaces in journals. Co-somnolence, the theory that shared sleep spaces, even for insomniacs, can reduce neurological tension through proximity. Basically, your brain goes, someone else is here. Maybe we're not doomed after all. It's not universally accepted. Some critics scoff. One medical journal insists proximity does not equal peace. But in one clinic's feedback log, someone writes, "I don't sleep more, but I'm less afraid of not sleeping." That feels more truthful than any graph. Another curious trend, lullabies return. Not the cloying nursery kind, but new ones written by sleepless musicians, whispered by lovers, hummed by strangers. A violinist named Clara records an album of string lullabies composed entirely during her own insomniac episodes. She calls it nocturnes for the unrepentant. It becomes oddly popular. You even catch yourself humming one of the tracks as you wash up one evening. Something about the low, slow notes makes your hands move more gently. You're changing too. Not just in sleep. In how you wait. You don't dread the long hours anymore. You don't reach for clocks or pills or harsh distractions. You simply sit, breathe, observe. The darkness doesn't feel hostile now. It feels companionable. There's a man who started joining your landing group, thin, nervous, never speaks. One night, he brings a candle in a chipped enamel cup and sets it down between you both. He watches it flicker for an hour, then stands and nods once before leaving. The next week, you do the same. Neither of you says a word, but you understand each other perfectly. One night, two sisters arrive at the same time. They're arguing, hushed, brittle. You brace for tension, but something about the air pulls them apart gently. One curls up on the windowsill. The other traces patterns on the rug with her finger. You leave them alone. When you come back, they're leaning against each other, asleep. The city outside continues, trams clatter, people hustle, neon hums. But you're inside a stillness that feels stitched together by years of sleepless hands. You think often about the first clinic now. The cracked tile floors. The mismatched chairs. That silence that once felt accusatory and now feels holy. It's all grown. Quietly. Tenderly. Like a vine crawling along the bones of a burnt house, wrapping it in green. One afternoon, you visit Dr. Jameson. She's in her office, surrounded by stacks of notes, some of them clearly doodled on by children. You ask her what she thinks it all means now, the movement, the clinics, the thousands of people floating between sleep and wakefulness under the banner of quiet. She says, "I think we stopped trying to cure the night." You nod. That sounds right. The girl in the coat still visits sometimes. She's taller now, more confident. She brings her own blanket. One evening, she says, "I have dreams now. Even when I'm awake." You tell her that's called imagination. She says, "No, they're better than that." You believe her. You're folding a worn quilt on the stair landing when a knock comes, not the soft, tentative kind you've grown used to, but a brisk, official one. You brace yourself. Two well-dressed men in charcoal coats stand at the door. One of them flashes a paper, a council notice, apparently. A complaint's been filed. An authorized congregation, the older one says, as if he's never said it out loud before and isn't quite sure it means anything. You blink. He shifts uncomfortably. Something about repeated gatherings, noise, people sleeping in communal spaces. Could be in violation of tenancy codes. You stare at him, the way you might stare at a dog who's just recited a limerick. Then, gently, you step aside. They hesitate, then step in. They see no beds, no money changing hands, no pamphlets being distributed, no chanting, no doctrines. Just a few folded chairs, a flask of warm tea, a sleeping teenager with earbuds in, and a grandmother knitting by the window. They leave without saying much. After that, you install a hook near the door and hang a little hand-painted sign. Rest happens here. It becomes a slogan. Within months, you see it chalked onto pavements, hung in tenement hallways, carved quietly into park benches. A whispery mantra passed between the quiet-eyed and the dream-deprived. But scrutiny continues. You overhear a landlord muttering about undesirables nesting in corridors. A local vicar complains that his midnight services are being outnumbered by those sleep people. A children's home bans any visits from the cooperative, citing emotional interference. And then the real storm hits, an incident at a Commons outpost in Islington. Nothing violent, just a group of dock workers who refused to leave after sunrise. The landlord locks the doors and calls the papers. One headline reads, "When the tired become the entitled." The cooperative issues no official response. Instead, a new term surfaces, the drift rights. No one knows who coins it, but it catches on. It's used to refer to anyone who builds rest into the margins of public life, often unofficially, sometimes illegally. The woman who sets up pillows in a railway tunnel. The boy who carries a quiet bell and rings it once every hour on his block. The group that transforms an old train carriage into a mobile nap station, gently lit and lined with cushions. You attend a drift-right circle once, in a disused stable turned meditation den. A man with a velvet vest says, "We don't seek sanctuary. We build it." You realize this is both beautiful and dangerous. Historians still argue whether the drift-right moment was the beginning of the end for the formal sleep commons. Some frame it as splintering, too many soft rebellions, not enough cohesion. Others say it was the natural evolution, from institutional response to cultural shift. One thing is clear, the government begins taking notice. Not kindly. You hear whispers of surveillance at the larger commons, officials showing up at 3 a.m., pretending to be clients, asking odd questions. One volunteer reports her flat searched after she brought herbal salves into a children's session. Another is fined for unlicensed therapy. There's a growing paranoia. Some volunteers stop coming. Others leave London altogether. One writes a note on the wall of her clinic before closing it. Sleep cannot be regulated. You carry that sentence like a pebble in your pocket. But just when things feel like they might collapse, something curious happens. A group of teachers from East London begins integrating rest practices into their classrooms, not naps, necessarily, but something they call rest windows. Moments between lessons where students are invited to simply breathe, listen to soft music, or lie their heads down in shared stillness. The pilot program is mocked in the press, lazy lessons for the TikTok generation. But quietly, other schools begin copying it. Then a bank introduces a mind-quiet room for employees. Then a textile factory schedules 2 sit and drift sessions during night shifts. There's no central command here. No board, no budget. Just ripple after ripple. You hear of a bus driver who now dims the cabin lights on his final evening run. A seamstress who embroiders pillowcases with tiny lullaby verses. A brass band that plays only minor key slow waltzes, once a month, at midnight in a park, for anyone who's awake and wandering. One evening, you attend a session held in the lobby of a post office. It smells of paper and patience. There's no therapist, no speech, just a radio playing softly and a sign that reads, "If you're awake, you're welcome." There's a woman seated on the counter, humming a tune. You realize you know it, it's from Clara's Nocturnes for the Unrepentant. The melody drapes across the tiled floor like fog. And through it all, the cooperative keeps existing, barely. Quieter now. Their spaces fewer. Their volunteers older. But still, they remain. One snowy morning, you receive a note, folded, unsigned, slipped under your door. It reads, "We dream in pockets now. You helped stitch the lining." You reread it 5 times. You don't know who sent it. But you pin it to the wall beside your chair. Because something is shifting again. Not just politics or press coverage. Something deeper. A turning inward. A new form of restfulness, not defined by place but by posture. Not about where you sleep, or even if, but how you carry your wakefulness. You find yourself walking differently. Slower. More deliberately. You look for the softest bench, the gentlest light, the faces that carry night with grace. You've stopped fearing your own insomnia. And just when you think the world might be done listening, You meet a nurse in line at a bakery. She looks exhausted, still in her scrubs. You mention the drift rights. She smiles, eyes going glassy, and says, "Oh, I keep a rest box in the break room. Just scented stones and soft music." But, she shrugs. It helps. You nod. And for a brief moment, in the smell of warm scones and jam, in the hush between strangers, you remember why all of this began. Not to fix sleep, but to make peace with it. You're watching dust dance in a sunbeam through the cracked pane of a stairwell window when the knock comes again, this time, softer. Not bureaucratic. Not frantic. Just tired. It's an old man in a green coat 2 sizes too big. He carries a wooden cane and a canvas bag stuffed with what looks like poetry books, string, and half a loaf of rye. He asks, quite calmly, "Is this still a quiet place?" You nod, and without another word, he sits. From then on, he comes every Wednesday. Says almost nothing. Just nods to the others, settles into his usual chair, pulls out a book he never reads. And somehow, everyone in the room breathes a little easier when he's there. Like he's a kind of living exhale. This is how things feel now, less revolutionary, more ritual. You've entered the season of slow. The city's no gentler, not really. Construction clatters on, buses honk at 3 a.m., sirens split the night like lightning. But inside the commons, and in the pockets seeded by drift rights, there's this new atmosphere. A kind of cultivated stillness. You don't chase sleep. You tend to it. Like a houseplant that only blooms when ignored. Historians still debate whether this era, the soft fade, some call it, was the apex or the twilight of the quiet revolution. One camp says it was the moment insomniacs reclaimed their dignity. Another insists it was when the movement lost its teeth. But you think they've missed the point. Because the revolution was never about victory. It was about recognition. And now, quietly, that recognition is spreading. You receive a letter from a friend in Manchester. It's written in the margins of a theatre playbill and reads simply, "They're doing it here, too." No speeches. Just warmth. You post it on the landing wall, beside the "Rest Happens Here" sign, and below a drawing someone left, crayon on scrap paper, of 5 people sleeping in a circle under a moon with a smiley face. Meanwhile, the children keep coming. One night, a girl named Ruth Freckles, 3 braids, always eating buttered toast, asks if she can bring her school project. She's writing a report on non-boring British movements, and apparently, the sleep commons qualify. She interviews everyone with a notebook the size of a saucer and a seriousness that could frighten Parliament. You catch her scowling at the page once and ask why. She says, "I don't know how to explain this without making it sound made up." You laugh. Welcome to history. Speaking of which, you've noticed something odd. Local archives begin requesting materials from the original clinics. Sleep logs. Meeting minutes. That weird poem Dr. Jameson once wrote on the back of a curry menu about the existential ache of night. Even the Museum of London reaches out, inquiring about any surviving banners or signage. One of their curators calls it a key countercultural moment in urban emotional life. You nearly choke on your tea. But the curator isn't wrong. Because even as the original network contracts, commons closing, drift right circles dissolving, the ripples linger. Libraries begin keeping rest nooks. Just cushions and heavy drapes, no time limits. A few train stations quietly repurpose lost luggage counters into pause pods. One church holds sleepy services, where the sermon is replaced with ambient cello music and soft breathing exercises. And yet, despite all this gentleness blooming like moss through concrete, the world is still the world. You overhear a man on the tram scoffing, "Those sleep weirdos? Bunch of dream-drunk parasites." You want to say something, but don't. You know that man. He's been on the landing before. He cried for 40 minutes once and left without a word. That's the thing about this movement, it doesn't demand loyalty. It only offers presence. And presence is a fragile thing. One spring morning, you find the stairwell empty. No one shows that night. Or the next. Or the next. For a moment, you panic, wonder if the dream is over. But then, the following Thursday, a woman appears. Not to sleep. Not even to talk. Just to sit and sew a button onto a coat in silence. You realize then, the clinic hasn't vanished. It's just become invisible again. Blending back into the rhythms of the city like a lullaby you hum without realizing. And you've changed more than you thought. You nap without shame now. You walk slowly, deliberately, even in crowds. You light candles without needing a reason. You know how to wait out the dark. One night, the girl in the father's coat, now older, braces off, wearing a university hoodie, returns. She doesn't sit. She stands in the doorway and says, "I just wanted to say thanks. For being still." You smile, and she vanishes back into the night. You think of Dr. Jameson often now. She's retired, somewhere in the country, tending to a greenhouse and mailing out sleepy newsletters to former volunteers. You got one last week. It ended with, "Sleep isn't the absence of struggle. It's the presence of surrender." You taped it to your kettle. There's a new girl who started coming. She brings her grandfather's music box, wins it once, and lets it play. The melody is broken, some notes sharp, others flat, but she listens with the care of a surgeon. It ends with a hiccupy clunk. She smiles. You do too. Because in the end, maybe that's what the quiet revolution always was, a bunch of broken lullabies, shared in the dark, by people who dared to whisper instead of shout. Not a storm. A settling. And while the official clinics may fade, and the cooperative may one day vanish entirely, something older and softer remains. Passed from hand to hand like a warm cup in the night. Sleep may never be easy, but you're no longer afraid of it. You're lying on the old couch by the stairwell window, the one with springs that whisper secrets, when you hear the quiet shuffle of slippers. It's Ewan again, the retired postman who never speaks above a murmur. He carries his thermos like a relic and always brings an extra biscuit, which he leaves wordlessly on the windowsill. Tonight, he sets the thermos down and says, "Saw a pigeon asleep in a phone booth today. Felt like a sign." You raise an eyebrow. He grins. Of what? I'm not sure. But a sign. This is what the revolution looks like now. Soft signs. Subtle markers. A world still bustling with its own urgency, but with little shrines of pause tucked into its corners, accidental cathedrals of stillness. You've heard whispers lately of a sleep map. Apparently, a group of university students started it on a whim, an interactive digital grid of London, pinned with every unofficial rest site, stairwells, libraries, laundromats with quiet corners, benches under forgiving trees. It spreads like spilled ink. Within months, cities beyond London begin their own versions. Berlin has dream tracks. Marseille calls theirs nap lines. Even someone in Buenos Aires emails the cooperative, asking if it's okay to use the name Commons. You all shrug. Who owns rest? A newspaper runs a headline. Sleep becomes resistance, the unlikely persistence of the night people. They mean it sarcastically, but it sticks. You're officially the night people now. It even becomes a hashtag, if you can believe it. #NightPeople. You chuckle imagining Clara's face if she could see it. Clara, Dr. Jameson, still writes, of course. In one of her last messages, she says, "Sleep, my dear, is no longer an act. It's an ethic." You think about that whenever the city screams. And lately, it has been screaming louder again. There's a new push from policymakers, productive wakefulness, they call it. A whole campaign about making use of midnight and eliminating passive time. They install bright LED displays in some neighborhoods, encouraging people to walk, shop, or work during the forgotten hours. You see one flashing over a bridge. Insomnia is untapped potential. You want to laugh, or sleep, or both. Historians still argue whether this campaign marked the resurgence of the insomnia industrial complex. Some say it was just capitalism's last hurrah in a tired world. Others insist it was necessary for night shift economies. But to the commons and the driftrights, it felt like a slap. So, you respond the only way you know how. You organize a still-in. It's not a protest, not exactly. More like a refusal. People gather, silently, in stations and cafes, libraries and stairwells. No chants, no signs. Just bodies at rest. Not asleep, just still. You attend the one at the Victoria and Albert Museum. It's dusk, and the marble floor reflects 100 quiet faces. Some sitting. Some curled up. Some just breathing, eyes closed. You catch your own reflection in the glass of a display case, soft, lined, but peaceful. The museum staff doesn't ask anyone to leave. It becomes an unspoken agreement. You can be here, as long as you don't disturb the art. But what if this is the art? What if a room full of strangers, surrendering noise and motion, is the greatest installation of all? In the weeks that follow, there's a visible shift. Some of the harsh lighting is dimmed. A few 24-hour stores begin offering earplugs at checkout. One bakery starts handing out warm milk after 10 p.m. You find a cafe with a small sign taped to the counter. Insomniacs welcome. No small talk required. There's a man asleep in the corner, an untouched tea cooling beside him. You order a scone and sit near the window. The world outside is still clattering along, still too loud, still too fast. But here, in this small triangle of time and quiet, you breathe. It's not victory. It's presence. There's a poem Clara once read aloud in the early days, from a little blue book that's since vanished. You can't remember all of it, but one line sticks in your head. We do not ask the sky to dim. We only ask to gaze without blinking. You whisper it to yourself sometimes when the streetlights flicker and your body refuses to shut down. Not everyone gets it, of course. There's a podcaster who calls the whole movement a cult of nappers. A retired politician who blames the Commons for the decline of British grit. A startup founder launches something called Sleepless, a capsule hotel chain designed to optimize wakefulness in 5-minute concentration bursts. You sigh. But also, you don't care. Because the tide is quiet, and it's always moving. One night, on a long walk through Bloomsbury, you find a statue you've never noticed before. A bronze figure on a bench, eyes closed, hands folded in its lap. There's no plaque, no dedication. Someone has placed a folded blanket over its shoulders. You sit beside it, not because you're tired, but because the city finally feels still enough to let you. It's in that moment that you understand the secret. The quiet revolution was never about fixing sleep. It was about giving it dignity. Giving you dignity. In the mess. In the wakefulness. In the breathing between the hours. You still don't sleep well most nights. But you're not alone anymore. You start the kettle at 3:12 a.m., and the sound of the bubbles is louder than expected, almost cheerful. That's how the night sneaks up on you these days, quiet, yes, but with a kind of backstage energy, like it's rehearsing something just for you. You think of calling it Act 4, the soft rebellion. No one's using the stairwell landing anymore, but you still climb up sometimes. Out of habit. Or muscle memory. Or the strange way the air changes on that third floor. It always smelled faintly of lavender and tea biscuits. Still does. There's graffiti now along the stairwell wall, but not the angry kind. Messages left in pencil, chalk, ink from leaky pens. We slept here once. This space forgave me. Stillness isn't silence. You feel something in your chest shift, and you wonder, has this always been grief? Grief for the nights you lost to pacing, to shame, to the grind of never being still enough, quiet enough, functional enough to qualify as rested. Because even as the world gradually opens to sleep as a right rather than a medical problem to be solved, there's this lingering ache. A suspicion that sleep still feels like a competition you were never meant to enter. You think of Marisol, the philosophy student who once led a nap circle by candlelight. She used to say, sleep isn't a destination. It's a form of love. And then she'd yawn so dramatically you couldn't help but join in. These days, she runs a podcast called Liminal. It's mostly long ambient sounds and half-whispered thoughts about time, breath, and dreams. She ends each episode with a drift-right affirmation. You are not broken. You are simply between. Between. That word keeps echoing in your brain as you sip lukewarm tea and watch condensation drip down the kitchen window. Between wake and sleep. Between movement and rest. Between the past of this revolution and the future no one quite dares to predict. Because yes, some sleep commons have folded. Yes, the cooperative lost funding. Yes, the clinics, at least in their original form, are ghosts now. But something else has taken root. Not in clinics. Not in files. But in culture. Historians argue about this moment, too, whether it marks the institutional death of the movement or its true birth. Whether the loss of centralized space weakens the cause or liberates it. You're not sure, either. But you've noticed things. Libraries now print quiet corners on their floor maps. Some city parks offer no activity zones, marked by signs that read simply, "You are welcome to do nothing here." And then there's the schools. A few progressive headteachers begin implementing rest periods. Not detention. Not recess. Just dim lights, soft mats, and the freedom to close your eyes for 15 minutes without being punished for laziness. A teacher from Essex writes you a letter. She says one of her students used the time to nap for the first time in years. He said he felt his spine unravel, she writes. Then he cried. Not from sadness, just from the relief of stillness. You hang the letter on your fridge. There are even whispers of government interest again. A low-level MP mentions in passing during an interview that perhaps the nation would benefit from a more humane relationship with night. And then quickly adds, of course, productivity is still essential. Of course. But you can tell. The seed is there. And speaking of seeds, Clara sends one final postcard. It arrives folded into a seed packet, the kind you buy for spring planting. Inside is a note. This one's chamomile. Plant it somewhere no one expects to rest. Then let them rest anyway. You carry it in your coat pocket for weeks before finally choosing a spot. There's a busy roundabout near your flat, always crammed with buses and honking scooters. But tucked into the edge is a sad square of dirt where nothing ever grows. You kneel down one evening just before dawn, fingers cold, and scatter the seeds like crumbs from a storybook. Then you leave. No sign. No message. Just potential. Weeks later, you pass it again, and there they are, tiny blooms, stubborn and cheerful, doing the impossible, resting in motion. It's then that you realize something quietly radical. The quiet revolution didn't fail. It graduated. Graduated from clinics to kitchen tables. From formal theory to whispered rituals. From leaflets to lullabies hummed on night buses. And you've become a carrier of the stillness. Not a leader. Not a founder. Just one more person who chose to pause in a world that told you to perform. You find yourself doing little things without noticing, lighting a candle when someone visits, brewing a pot of tea instead of offering a bottle of wine, asking people if they're sleeping well and really listening when they say no. Sometimes they cry, sometimes they laugh, but they always stay just a little longer than they meant to. And maybe that's all this ever was. A permission slip. A kind of communion. The night no longer feels like a punishment. It feels like a conversation. And even when you don't sleep, you rest. Because you've learned the difference. You reach for the crumpled scrap you keep tucked into your bedside table. An early note from one of the first clinic visitors, back when it all felt fragile and brave and impossible. It says, "I didn't fall asleep tonight, but I stopped running." You close your eyes and smile. The clock hums 4 a.m. and doesn't bother to chime. Even time itself is learning to tread gently. You've grown used to this hour. It's the unclaimed space between days, a velvet hinge holding everything together. Outside your window, London breathes in pockets. A bus whispers past, its lights low and golden. Someone down the block coughs, then quiets. Somewhere, a fox pads along a garden wall, unseen. It's not silence, but it's a peace you've made peace with. You sit cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by remnants of a life lived awake. Mismatched slippers, herbal tea bags, the thick black notebook you started keeping 3 years ago, the one titled Simply Drift. You flip through it now. It's swollen with scraps, postcards from Clara, napkin poems, floor plans of long-gone clinics, notes from overheard cafe conversations. A few pages are torn where someone once fell asleep on top of it. There's even a pressed feather taped into the back cover. Pigeon. Probably. Maybe owl. London's a bit of both. And scrawled across one page in sleep-slanted handwriting is a quote from the earliest days. "Let sleep be not the destination, but the direction." You stare at it and realize, this has always been a pilgrimage. Not to slumber, but to softness. To care. To the radical idea that your worth is not measured by how much you produce before collapsing. Historians still argue over the official end of the Quiet Revolution. Some say it ended when the original clinics closed their doors for good. Others insist it ended when the movement became trendy, when sleep pods turned into Instagram backdrops and startup CEOs began bragging about their rest optimization routines. But that's the thing about revolutions. They don't end. They dissolve. They seep into the bones of the culture and linger in rituals so quiet, most people forget they were once dangerous. You see it now everywhere. In the friend who apologizes less for needing to rest. In the cafe that dims its lights after 8 p.m. In the public library that plays soft instrumental jazz during finals week. In the toddler-sized earplugs a designer quietly launched and never marketed. Even in the language. People say I'm resting now, instead of I'm doing nothing. They say I'm tending to my sleep, like it's a garden. A practice. A rite. You walk to the window and lean your forehead gently against the glass. The city is a hush of halos and wet pavement. There's a small cafe down the street with one light still on, a familiar silhouette behind the counter pouring tea into 2 cups. You know exactly what's happening. A tired soul wandered in. Someone else offered them heat and space and a chair not designed for urgency. And now, 2 strangers sip something warm in the middle of the longest hours, speaking softly about everything or nothing. That is the revolution. And here's the final secret. Even when you sleep, it goes on without you. It curls up beside strangers on trains. It lingers in late-night radio. It hums in the fans people leave running not because it's hot, but because it's comforting. It lives in the blankets tucked around people in waiting rooms, the eye masks sold at corner shops, the awkward quiet that people now let stretch without killing it with chatter. You are no longer alone in this. And maybe you never were. You climb into bed not because you're exhausted, but because you can. Because sleep isn't a reward tonight. It's a welcome guest. And if it doesn't come, that's fine too. You'll be here, still, safe, awake or not. Because this world, finally, has space for both. Let yourself exhale now. You've walked so far, through echoing stairwells and soft-lit corners, past tea-stained pages and paper-thin clinic walls. You've moved through a world that once rushed you into silence, and now dares to hold still with you. Let that stillness reach your breath. Feel your chest rise, slow, patient. No effort. No show. Feel your body melt just slightly deeper into the mattress, or the couch, or the floor you've claimed tonight. It's all sacred ground now. Sacred not because it's perfect, but because you dared to pause on it. There's nothing left to prove. Nothing urgent waiting in the wings. All the noise, the neon, the digital flicker, they'll wait for you. But they don't own you. Not here. Not now. You are not a broken machine. You're not behind. You're not missing out. You are a tide in your own rhythm, washing against the shore of rest. So if your eyes are open, let them soften. And if they're closed, don't chase sleep. Let it arrive, if it wants to. Or let it wait. Either way, you are safe. And you are enough. The world will keep spinning without your worry. For now, just float. Like mist across an early dawn river. Like the soft click of a lamp turned low. Like breath. Soft. Slow.